Do, dee, ah, be, do, down.
Solid.
Okay,
How are
excellent.
you?
I'm excellent. It's
So
great to
nice to
meet
meet
you.
you. I watched a couple of your interviews because you did all my friends.
Oh, good. I love it. That's
So it
great.
was fun. Just did Phil Haynes, who I've never met, but he's a good friend of my bass player.
Okay.
So we've been friends for 5 years during the pandemic online. And Kathy Siegel Garcia is a great friend of mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was talking to her last night on the phone about this because the first one was her show that I did
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah.
many moons ago when the pandemic had just started.
Yeah. Yeah, we did interview during that time, and I think we interviewed afterwards, and I didn't realize that she was doing a bevy of interviews, so it was great to connect. But both of them are wonderful. It's good. So you'll be in good company. I'm looking forward to getting into the latest album, Long as You're Living, and your very illustrious career in music. So to begin with, speaking of the pandemic, how did you make it through that time period, and how did it change you?
Well, for me, excuse me, the pandemic made everybody on my level because of my health. So when the pandemic began, everyone was home like me. So I was able to talk to anyone that I hadn't been able to talk to. Everyone was home and looking for a way to still be creative. So my first call was Jay Clayton, and she and I have been friends for 40 years, but could never really work together because I couldn't travel. So I became her first Zoom client, student, friend, mentor, mentee, and became very close friends over that period. So the first thing we did was we started doing lessons on Zoom twice a week. Then she started having classes. So that made it 4 times a week. And then we started going out to clubs by Zoom together, meeting at bars in New York and texting back and forth and having wine and watching amazing jazz. So it was also a time that I got to hear everybody live from my bed. So sitting in bed, in my pajamas, seeing the greatest things, all New York City people and all the LA people and in the UK. And it was just a magnificent time. And then there started these other Zooms. And Jay shared an invitation with me to a Zoom by one of my favorite writers. His name's Stephen Nachmanovich. And he's an improvising classical musician, but I know him from his book, Free Play, that was written in the 90s about jazz improvisation. And it was my favorite book, but I didn't know the name of the author. So Jay said, I'm invited to the Zoom, and it's about this book, Free Play and Art of Is. And I said, oh, that's my favorite book. I'll go, because she didn't read the book, so she wouldn't go. So I showed up, and 3 years later, I learned so much from being in this group. So Kathy's in this group also. So it's people from their 20s to their 80s, and they're all musicians. They're all improvisers. They're half classical, 3 jazz singers, a couple youngins that are just starting out in academia in the music business. And so we all talked about improvisation and life. And we started having topics, and it's still going strong. And
Wow.
the topics are so spiritual, and it kind of lasts me the whole week. I think about it as I practice. So the other thing that happened during this time was I had been walking in the pool for 10 years as my exercise because I walk with a walker. And so that was really great for me because I also had a whole bunch of friends that did that too. So when I did make a CD release party, they all came, and that was pretty intense, because they didn't really know I was a singer. So I was out of it for quite a while. My last really big gig was I went to India and sang, and ended up there for about 3 months in 1991. And then I noticed that I was having a little trouble holding myself up, holding my body up, and I was kind of leaning on everything. And that began a little downhill for me physically. And the very worst part of it, I was in bed. And when that happens to you, your normal, the tempo of your life stops. Sort of like if you have a surgery or if you get cancer or something, a lot of your daily natural flow of things is completely stopped. And all you're doing is from moment to moment making really important decisions about your health. And so it got to the point where I needed somebody to give me a shower. And I thought that was really, the lowest point of my my illness. So you don't get better from these things, and you get older, but you also realize that singing is the best medicine, and it's also my only religion. So without it, I was lost. So I didn't really wait till the pandemic to decide to come back. I just decided one day that I had this record from 1987, and it never went out. And it wasn't that far from being ready to go out. It was really just, a little bit of money to get it pressed. And then I had to explain why I was putting out a record from 1987. And I didn't really know why, because I didn't know the future. But it turned out that I was doing it as a test to see if I could still come back and sing before it was too late. So I called up a friend and I said, I'd like to sing. And he has a church, a jazz church in DC. It's called the Westminster DC Church. And every Friday night, they have a full house of people and they have jazz. And he invited me to sing with a quintet. And it was my first time as a handicapped person. So I had the walker, I had the how am I going to get on stage, and I had to get on the stage 6 times because I was the guest. So I went on and did 3 songs and then it came off. So it was a pretty big thing to go through. But I was ready, and the people were so with me. So it wasn't like I was rolling down the aisle and everybody was going, ew, ew, ew. They were like, yeah, bro, girl, we're here. There were even people seated on the stage, like they have seats. It's so packed at this little church, but they have half the seats around the band on the stage. And they're all screaming and yelling and clapping. And it was just the greatest night of my life. And that was November 9th, 2019. So the record came out June 21st, 2019. And here we are. It's tomorrow, June 21st, 2024, for the next one. So it took 2 years. We recorded in 2022 in 2 days. It took 2 years because everybody got COVID.
Yeah.
And everybody had knee surgeries, and people's parents passed away. Just everything made this take a really long time. So besides having a comeback spiritually and musically, the biggest thing that I've learned is patience. And the biggest thing I learned from Jay was that I had a very vague idea of what a comeback would be like at my age. And so Jay, besides being an angel and a brilliant jazz artist, she was so organized. And when we started to talk about my comeback, she called it my second time around. And she just was not going to let it not happen. And so she just kept talking about, you got to see it really clearly, and then you never fail. So it was like taking this vague one, I want this dream, I want this concert, I want these guys to play with, and making it happen step by step. And of course, it's just like learning to sing, but I needed her. I don't think it would have happened had I not had her.
Yeah.
She was just always there to pick me up when I thought I couldn't. And there are plenty of reasons why it was a miracle that I could. One of the reasons is because the throat doctor told me I had lost my voice. So not only did I have, physical therapy, I had vocal therapy, speech therapy, singing lessons, and working with Jay on jazz. So then there was another group, a circle singing group that developed. So I had about 8 Zooms going on for 3 years, and a couple of them have ended, and a couple of them have kept going or morphed into other things. So now that Jay's gone, Kathy is doing a workshop kind of like that, and Jay's workshop continues. So so I guess that's all.
Yeah,
And
no, that's
all.
great. That's great. So how did this jazz journey begin for you? How did this journey into the music and jazz begin for you?
So I went to college as a music major, and I kind of found that 1970 was the year I graduated high school. So at that time, if you wanted to study jazz, you could not do it academically. So I went to the University of Maryland as a voice major, but as a classical singer, and I didn't have that voice. So I stayed for 2.5 years, and every time there was a concert or a, what did they call it? The test where the teachers hear you sing, they would laugh and say, you shouldn't sing Italian art songs. You should give her a guitar and let her sing a folk song. So I wasn't really, picked as a jazz singer yet, but I was definitely picked as you're not classical and this is not really where you should be. So I dropped out of college and went to New York, and I found a teacher through a friend, and he was a very famous teacher in New York. And so I had to move to New York, and I was a waitress for a year, and then I got my first job as a singer. And I found that if you were a singer in New York, you had to just travel constantly because you never would work in New York, especially in your 20s. So I did that. I toured and toured and toured. And then that was when I found that I needed to have the back surgery. So I was about 21, 22, and I needed to take a break for that. That was a year. So by the time I came back, I had been listening to a lot of jazz. And I'd been listening to a lot of singers that weren't quite jazz singers, but they were turning me on to jazz composers. So I remember being very interested in Bonnie Raitt. And then she sang something by Mose Allison. And then I went over and heard Mose Allison. And then after I heard Mose Allison, that led me into some blues people. And I was really into Aretha. And then once I got into Aretha, that got me into a lot of singers who came before her. So I guess the thing that I really did was I learned to sing from records because there wasn't a teacher. I learned to sing classical from teachers, and I had some outstanding teachers. But before Jay, there was no one who would say that they could teach anything but classical. And Jay's first sentence was, you can't teach jazz. And then she proceeded to teach me how to do everything that I now am excited about. And I feel like I'm in kindergarten as a jazz singer. And it's because I always wanted to be a jazz singer, but I think I was a jazz stylist. So when I started to make this record with her, it was so interesting how she produced it. We went in the studio and she said, let's just do each song twice. And there was a rehearsal, but it wasn't like a rehearsal of the tunes or the record. It was more like a rehearsal because these were my friends of 50 years and I hadn't seen them in 30 years. And they popped into my apartment at my invitation. And then it was 4 days of my dream coming true. So the first day was the rehearsal. And then we all had dinner. And then Jay stayed with us the whole time for 4 nights. So then we went to the studio. And so it seemed like the first take was the rehearsal and the second take was the take. But sometimes that wasn't the case because sometimes something really great happened the first time. But it was just, we just sort of did that for 2 days. And then at the end, she says, oh my God, we have 75 minutes worth of music. We'll never use it all. However, we did. So the guy that I did this with, Bob Dawson, he was with me for my first album. My second album was with Claire Fisher, that was in LA, but he was with me for Highwire for the recording, and then 30 years later for the mix.
Wow.
And during the mix, there was this one word that I didn't like the way I pronounced, and it bothered me for 30 years, and it was the word draw, D-R-A-W, and I sang draw. So we're mixing it, and he says to me, I have the same mic from 30 years ago. Pop on in and sing that note. So I hadn't sung, in all those years. So I popped on in, and the first take, it was perfect. And I think he made me do it 3 times just in case. And he says, so you see, you can sing. And also you've been singing in my ear the whole mix. So don't tell me you lost your voice. And so that was really the first moment that I really thought it could be possible to do it. But then when my mother passed away, there was a group of people and I was sitting and I was talking to them about my mom. I prepared a speech and I thought, this is exactly like a concert. Here are people that want to hear what I have to say, and I have something really important to share. What's the difference? And then I knew, and I didn't know how, but that was the day I sort of, maybe my mom tapped me on the shoulder from Jazz Heaven and said, don't give up. And so everyone I've met throughout the pandemic has been a cheerleader for my comeback. And they've also been demonstrating extreme strength and creativity. And I also think that the technology between the time that I began my singing in the 70s and what's happening now has made it so easy to learn how to do things. Like I remember in the 70s when I would practice with Aretha, and then when they would do the solo, I would sing her part without her because there was no such thing as a music -1. But then of course there was that, and now we've got this iReal app, and we all did concerts on Zoom singing with the computer, and it's so advanced. You can put it in any key, in any tempo. It's got different feels, different instruments. It's not like a band and they're not going to respond to you, but it's a phenomenal practice tool. I probably should let you get a question in.
Oh, well, I just want to get to, I mean, you've done such a great job of weaving a mosaic of this album and where you've been and what you've overcome. So I think it's probably apropos to lead everybody to the correct place to buy or get this album, learn more about any of your previous work, anything in your world, where they go.
So tomorrow is the release date. And I don't know if it's at 8 a.m. or what time it happens, but it hits all the streaming services and Amazon and everything, Spotify, Apple. So it's you get them all. You don't get one, you get them all. And I am going to put links on my Facebook page and Instagram and all that. Social media is pretty amazing. I've seen people get a last minute gig and put a little thing on Facebook and sell out a little jazz room in 24 hours when all of a sudden something comes up. So it is kind of a miracle as a promotional tool. But the other thing is it's a great way to connect with other musicians.
Yeah.
And now all these people are going on Bandcamp.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I'm thinking about that.
Okay.
But I'm going to be on everything but that, and
Okay.
I may do that eventually. But so far, I'm just waiting for the opportunity to just have it be available. So it's been on the radio for about 8 weeks in New York because I sent it to a couple of friends and they didn't wait. And that was pretty much just, for fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
One guy, my friend Russ Kassoff, who used to, I don't know if you know him, he used to play with Frank Sinatra. He has a show and each week he plays one cut. And so he's on, I can tell how many weeks because he's like on number 8. So when it's 12, I don't know what happens, but it's pretty much, it just reminds me of my first time that I put out a record. So as far as my other records and getting them, Highwire is available everywhere. But the other ones are harder to find. So I did a record in 1985 with Claire Fisher and his band. And that is really difficult to find unless you can find it used. When I first went on Facebook trying to locate it, I found it for $700 for one CD. And I thought, my value has really increased. And then later, when I saw, the people are selling the record. It came out in a record also. My first album only came out in record. So I just recently had it made into a CD in case there's, a desire for it. I can just press it or put it out.
Okay.
I
Excellent.
don't know if people really want CDs. I've
Yeah.
asked a lot of people. I don't even have a CD player.
Yeah, I think it's for a lot of the radio DJs, but at any rate, it's going to be on streaming. Lisa, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your resilience and best of luck with this release. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much, Joe.